Jasmine is with us from the Roaring Fork School District, right? Correct. And so we are so excited to open up this space here. I promise not to breathe on y'all, okay? All right. I've just been around a lot of people. So one of the things that we wanted to gather together were some folks who are actually doing this work, doing some integrative system work, sort of weaving these things together. So we have Anna Stout, who is the mayor of Grand Junction, Alfonso Espino, who works with the Global Elyria Swansea Coalition, and Jasmine Ramirez Romaz, who is from the Roaring Fork School District. And I just made sure I knew where you were from and then butchered your last name. I'm so sorry. I apologize. And so we are offering each of them an opportunity to give us a little bit of their story, and then we'll open up the floor to some Q&A from you guys. Then we'll take our break so that you can continue some of that conversation. And we'll come back where Rodney and I will tell you guys how to do what we've been talking about doing. So definitely stay for Module 3. But take a moment to turn your attention towards the panel. We will not be looking up here at any of the projected screens there for a moment. But if you guys would like to introduce yourselves briefly, and then I can ask you some questions. If you pass that, then I don't have to fight with you guys about it, right? And it should be fine.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the team for inviting myself in this panel.
Thank you.
So Anna beat me because I live in Glenwood Springs. So Grand Junction is further away. But I wanted to take a second also to honor the fact that you guys started off with a student. And in my work, that is who the work I do directly impacts students in our district. And it was just a great way to remind this community why the urgency exists. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. My name is Anna Stout. I'm the mayor of the city of Grand Junction, but I'm also the executive director of the Roycehurst Humane Society, which is the largest regional humane society on the Western Slope. And I am a certified Spanish translator and interpreter, and I work in primarily court settings, but also medical and business. And I'm also the founder and president of the Foundation for Cultural Exchange, which runs Grand Junction's sister city down in El Salvador. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Anna.
Hello, and thank you for having me. My name is Alfonso Espino. I am a community organizer for the Global Elyria Swansea Coalition, my beloved coalition. And more importantly, I've grown up here and lived here my whole life thus far, thankfully. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, you guys. Take a second, and I'm not going to call on you, sort of pass the microphone around. If someone hogs it, I will exert control. But the facilitator benefit here, I would like to know what you think the top 2 challenges for your community are. I'm sure there are multiple challenges facing your community, but if you were forced to list 2 of them, what are the top 2?
So that's funny because I actually have like 6 pages of our biggest challenges. But our top challenges I don't think are different than what a lot of Colorado cities are going through. We have a severe housing shortage right now. So that housing crisis is for ownership, it's for rentals, and it's also producing a lot of homelessness in our community. So that's one that's primarily affecting us in a way that it hasn't until just recently. And then also I think mental health would be the other situation that we're facing right now. We have one of the highest rates of poor mental health in the state. We have some of the highest suicide rates, especially youth suicide rates. And while it's not specifically a city problem or a city issue, it's obviously a factor in everything, including housing, and including economic development, job creation, education, and outcomes in general. So I would say currently those are the 2 things that we're working the hardest on.
I would say that the first and most present challenge that affects people's material conditions in my communities is definitely housing, and the very basis on which somebody can live and thrive. And then the second, which I think is directly connected to that, is the violence and the power of the state against communities like ours. And that signifies a lot of things, but I think it is a good, just general issue that's been continuing, and that overlaps a lot of different issues, whether it's the environmental degradation, the targeted degradation of our communities, whether it is the continued colonization of our communities and our people and subjugation to that power, whether it's the kicking out of people forcefully from their homes and the use of state powers like eminent domain, whether it's driving through another freeway expansion and privatization of those public utilities. I see that all as interconnected to the violence and the power of the state and the direct power imbalance between a community like ours and the really what is institutionalized white supremacist state, which I think often is too much used as a buzzword, and we forget the actual significant violent undertone that I think it gets kind of getting into a little bit of a conflicts of popular political agendas, because this whole country is right-wing in economics, and planning is a right-wing institution, and the only intention of planning is to facilitate the flow of capital.
Oh. I'm so sad.
No, but actually to follow up to his point and to Anna, so I am, I think we're right on par for mental health. It was interesting to watch the demographer's PowerPoint presentation and see that Garfield County was right up there, and everything, and population growth and issues that we have like presently today that do include housing, that do include how we've been growing. And the one thing that we suffer with is not just mental health, but is the representation when it comes to leadership, right? So in my valley, there are, in Garfield County, there are 3 school districts, RE2, RE16, and mine, RE1. RE2 is 52.6% Latino, 44% white. RE16 is 60% white, 35% Latino, and my school district is 60% Latino and 39% white. In that whole valley, there are 9 cities. I'm one of 2 board members ever elected to the school board in any of those districts, and one of 4 elected people of color. So the disparity, right, in regards to how we're able to advocate for our communities, especially recognizing that we are a mobile community, we're a rural resort town, and then seeing all of the data that's coming up in rural Colorado, and particularly Garfield County, right, is being represented. And then you see the leadership that doesn't reflect the community. And so it really goes back to this notion that we are lacking, not just in all of these services, but how to adequately provide resources and connect with the community to hear what their needs are, because they directly know how to solve issues.
That's actually a brilliant segue into my second question. Thank you very much for providing that, which is, what is working? Are there creative things that are emerging and bubbling up? Are there some ways your community's been able to leverage and build? Can you share anything that is happening that we need to know about?
Yeah, let me try not to hog the mic on this, because we have a lot going on in Grand Junction, and I think that if you kind of summed it into 2 themes, we're doing a lot of collaboration and we're doing a lot of innovation on top of innovation. So taking concepts like a co-responder program and bringing it in-house and making putting it on a more solid foundation. But one of the main things we're trying to do is involve the community. When I started on city council in 2019, we were facing very different problems than we're facing right now. And so most of what we're working on right now, we're in the early stages of. Despite having been working on a lot of these things for a while, we're addressing new realities related to them. So the city of Grand Junction just recently commissioned a housing study, and this has really helped us understand what's actually going on in our community. The city has traditionally not had anything to do with housing other than development codes, right? And annexations and zoning. But in terms of us actually helping with housing generation and being a part of that, that's not traditionally been the city's role. Especially because you know much about the western part of Colorado. It's a very libertarian mentality part of our state. So, you know, government getting involved in things like that has not normally been something that's supported. But we are saying that the quality of life of our residents really is impacted by things like housing. So for the first time in Grand Junction's history, we have a line item in our city budget for housing. We put $1 million aside just at the very beginning of the year, and then have also been finding other sources of funding to put into that so that we can help either leverage funding to help either land bank or help organizations that are working on developing attainable and affordable housing. I think that's one piece of it, is really starting to look at the fact that we as a city cannot just stay in a city lane anymore, and we have to start sort of putting some tentacles out and being a part of some of these other solutions. Putting money into, not just money, but also staff members. So we now have 2 housing positions on staff at the City of Grand Junction. We created a position that's specifically meant to do outreach, especially with our underrepresented communities. That was something that we've never done before. It was just not on anybody's radar, and it took a council member coming on and being a broken record over and over about what we've done to engage this community or that community to finally create that. And we also have really started focusing on how we partner with our university, with our nonprofits, with our housing agencies, and how do we actually get involved in all of that. So I think that collaboration and those partnerships are one way that Grand Junction is really working on that. And without getting into a ton of details, you know, I think that the way we look at economic development is another thing that we're doing. So when we see that we have an industry that's struggling or industries that are struggling, that's something we go straight to our economic partners to talk about. How do we get a shortage of workers in this industry trained up through our university and through our community college that's connected to the university. So making sure that we have agility to be able to address those problems. If there's a shortage today, let's not develop a program 6 years from now that addresses it. We need to, you know, stand up a curriculum for next semester or for next school year. And then the other piece of it is really just trying to figure out how our community can engage the community in solving these problems. Because the city really has had a paternalistic approach to governance for a very long time. Just from a demographic perspective, when I stepped onto council, I was the youngest person by 25 years. I'm the only woman on a 7-person council. So you can imagine representation is not really a strength in Grand Junction. We're getting there, slowly, very slowly. But one example of this is the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan. We got about $12 million, the city of Grand Junction did. And part of it we used for our lodging tax replacement. It's very technical, but the other piece of it, we had about $9 million left over. And instead of the city and the elected officials who are ostensibly supposed to be the voices and the representation of our community, we brought a committee together. And we have a citizen committee that is now determining what the biggest priorities are and how to dispense those funds. So it really is bringing the community in for their engagement and having their voices. We're also rewriting our entire zoning development code right now. We're bringing it up to modern day standards. We're eliminating the whereases and henceforths of the documents, and really trying to make sure that it aligns with our comprehensive plan and our strategic goals, which include housing and quality of life, and obviously the basic things like infrastructure and public safety. But for that, we brought a committee together that was also made up of community members, so that we're making sure that as we're talking development and as we're looking at land use and as we're looking at our annexation rules and our codes, that they're not overlooking people who are being impacted by that. The one voice that I think we've done a really poor job of engaging to this day is our youth voice. We just approved a 10-year comprehensive plan that basically dictates how we use land for the next 10 years. And we didn't bring any young people in. And there are 17, 16, 18-year-olds who are going to be raising families and buying their first homes and standing up businesses in a community that they were not involved in that plan-making process. So I'll pass from here.
I would say, you know, I may have came off as a pessimistic person.
It's okay.
I don't
Good reason.
mean to. It's just the reality in which we live, right? But in our community, I think the thing that we are most famous for, and they, us being Global Swansea Coalition, our community, our neighbors that are organizing with us, is definitely the land trust model. But it's not only land trust in name, because that, its simple existence does not equal its success. The reason, the foundation for its success, why it's working in our community, is because it is owned by our community. There are other land trust models, land banking models that exist across the city and across the state and across this country, but that are mimicking, mirroring corporate style housing, government style organization, and has no actual basis in the community, has no actual power collectively in the community. So I would say it's working because of the fact that, of course, it's not only producing housing, but it's housing that we control. It's housing that's putting people into homes at a very rapid pace compared to what people thought was possible. The early stages of the coalition 5-7 years ago, a lot of current and former city folk being the government workers, were explicitly opposed and told a lot of our organizers to their faces that what you're doing is impossible. And 5 years later, it's produced 12 houses. It has more on the way. It's consistently finding funding, the residents, the neighbors to participate in what I regard as the biggest success of the land trust, which is the political education side of it. It's a changing of the paradigm of our connection to our community and our land, where we are moving from being, the equivalent of modern day serfs into a model in which we recognize the inherent value of the land and our association to it and our collective power and our collective struggle. And the significance of that, I think, is that it's disrupting this logic that I even hear still permeating today of this logic of the market and the supply and demand and the individualism, as if there isn't this whole violent system backing it up, as if there isn't commodification of these very things that we're talking about, as if there isn't a motive for profit, and in terms of the land that I'm speaking of, the speculation of it, as if that's never part of the conversation, as if what's been happening over the past decade in Denver, but really continuation of the history of the United States, but even was more apparent than ever because the white middle and upper classes are now feeling the effects of it. I think we're demonstrating or successfully showing both the outsiders, those coming in, those living outside of the perimeters of our community, and most importantly, those inside of it, those that are most impacted by these policies, the only way out, which is collective struggle, collective vision, and collective agreements to change the world around us, to shape the world around us, because this isn't, something that can't be touched. This isn't something that can't be done. And the land trust model alone, when it's actually rooted in that collective power, is the biggest success to date, and we're definitely most known for it. But don't let that word confuse you, because it's the foundation of it that I just spoke of that make it successful, not its mere existence.
So I guess I will be the pessimist on the panel, but I think for us being a rural resort town, we are for the first time in the history of our community building infrastructure. We are, since the pandemic, for the first time having conversations on disparities and inequities in our community, not just around representation, but lack of resources. I live an hour away from Aspen, which is, it's Aspen, like what that means, right? When I say Aspen. And yet our school district, who is 60% Latino, also has 56% of our students in free and reduced lunch. And so I think for us, the only success that we've had has been, since the pandemic, this urgency that nonprofits, right? We have over 500 nonprofits in our valley. That for the first time they realized that they have missed the mark on serving our community truly. And so I think that urgency has carried over, the accountability to these nonprofits. And I don't want to just say the nonprofits locally, but the nonprofits that say that they're statewide, right? If you're a statewide nonprofit, that includes rural Colorado. And so I think that urgency and that sort of accountability that's coming from communities like mine has really, since the pandemic, taken off. And it has really put us on the map of Colorado. I think also, we have, as we've seen through PowerPoint presentations today and data, we have a lot of issues. We have housing, we have mental health issues, we have fires. Grizzly Creek Fire was in my district. We just had a fire on Wednesday before I left. I went to come here because I was afraid that there might rain and there would be a mudslide and I'd be stuck on that side. And my neighbor came out and, she was scared, right? The fire was near her home. And the fact that we still have a system of communication that doesn't represent the community that we live in, that doesn't share out information in our native tongue to make sure that everyone who is close by knows that this is a life or death situation sometimes, it is so troublesome, right? That we rely on friendly neighbors to tell us if we're safe or not. And so I think for areas like mine that are rural resort, that have a moving economy, have a lot of money coming in and out, we have very basic infrastructure needs that are not being met yet. And I think that since the pandemic, that urgency and that the power to keep those in power accountable has become larger.
Good. That's exciting news. I'm not ever going to call that pessimism or inappropriate. I think that's the kind of thing that's real and true. I'll remind you that politeness is not a gospel value, and that being straightforward is actually the loving choice.